When I make a build, I have a goal in mind. Maybe I want to use all sorts of non-meta guns, or I want to slam build, or I want to make melee viable. The goal for this build is to be able to use almost any action skill. I don't want to save phase slam only for bossing. I want reverberation in my arsenal. I want to see enemies get smashed by fist over matter. And of course, I want to abuse ties that bind. I don't want to save that phase slam anointed weapon that just dropped for another character, or only for the boss. I want to use it now. The way to achieve this goal is to merge all three of my previous builds. This build slams, it melees, it's got 10 action skills, it can use lots of anointments, it can make non-meta guns do a lot of damage, and of course it can take the best guns and crush the hardest content. I present to you Universal Amara. One build to rule them all. The best, I've combined them. One build that ties them all and in the starlight binds them. Making non-meta guns useful at the highest difficulty, and for a long time that just wasn't possible with Mayhem 2.0, but some recent buffs to weapons and other forms of attack have allowed enough variation that I don't feel pigeonholed into a narrow meta anymore. And since I'm not confined to a small amount of viable weapons, I can escape the endless slog of farming a dedicated drop looking for the perfect element and anointment. With this build, I get to fire up the game, go to whatever area or challenge I feel like playing, beat it with a gun few people are using, and occasionally add a new drop or two to my arsenal. I want to go mobbing with a phase slam anointed Maggie, for example. There's so much synergy in theory that makes this build work, and I don't think there's enough time to explain it without boring you to death. You likely know it all anyway. Let's just hit up the skill trees and I'll explain some things along the way. In the blue tree, max out fast hands for greater DPS and a smaller chance to get wrecked while reloading. Then we make rush stacks useful to us by putting 1 point into do harm, 1 into violent tapestry, and 2 into alacrity. Do harm will increase our action skill damage, and since we have a lot of action skills to choose from, having them actually deal decent damage is awesome. Violent Tapestry increasing our status effect chance is mostly to help debuff enemies through Harmageddon, although it does help with cryo efficiency when using cryo weapons. It will also help us build rush stacks when we aren't using the Phase Zerker class mod. Indeed, another class mod we can use with this build is the Golden Rule. More on that later. And Alacrity of course keeps the bullets flying. 3 points to Transcend for the critical hit damage boost. 5 points into Restless because we love our extra action skill cooldown rate in this channel. If you don't like this skill, you can get right out of my face. 1 point to Ascendant to further buff our action skills and their augments. 3 points to Laid Bare. Laid Bare is its own multiplicative number in the gun damage formula, so it's quite a strong skill, and we will absolutely be damaging enemies with our action skill. This whole build will have buffs to all kinds of different parts of the damage formula, maximizing our DPS and bringing some weaker guns up to snuff. On that note, 3 points to Wrath. 1 point to Remnant. Always grab this skill if you can. 2 points to Awakening to make our rush stacks work even harder for us. And lastly, the incredible Avatar. We've unlocked 4 action skills here in this tree. These only vary slightly. Reverberation has the potential to do a lot of damage if you line enemies up, and Tandava combined with Stillness of Mind is fun for making a whole group of enemies pause for a sec. On to the red tree. We're avoiding Anima because it's tough to make dot damage do much in Mayhem 10, and we want any dots on us to be gone as soon as possible, because we want our shield to be fully charged as much as possible, because we want to take advantage of topped off, because we want our action skills back as soon as possible, because some of them have a long cooldown, and because we want to keep our anointments going. Whew. Anyway, 3 points to Steady Hands and 3 points to Infusion. Infusion will add an extra damage instance and thus an extra projectile where possible, and it allows us to heal with non-elemental guns through sustainment. 5 points into Tempest for a solid boost to our damage with something multiplicative. 1 point to Illuminated Fist because yes, we melee with this build. This 1 point will make it so our melees heal us with sustainment. We're also taking advantage of Groundbreaker, the new Guardian rank perk. 3 points into Wildfire to spread status effects around, building rush stacks and bringing Harmageddon into play. We also want to always have radiation damage through a bonus element anointment. Radiation explosions when an enemy dies are very powerful, and Wildfire will spread the radiation status effect around even more. 1 point to Dread and 1 point to Deep Well. Easy, self-explanatory 2-point investments. Then 3 points into Indiscriminate. Not enough can be said about how powerful this skill is, especially in Mayhem 10, where action skill damage is scaled very well. Indiscriminate deals action skill damage, as recently discovered by other content creators. Then we get 1 point into Sustainment. Mayhem 2.0 allows guns to scale up in levels while our character's health remains the same. With a Mayhem 10 gun, the damage that it deals is so great relative to our health that only 1 point into Sustainment is needed. It will also heal us through our melees and our slam and our action skills, all very powerful forms of attack on Mayhem 10. So we've got another 4 action skills in this tree. Ties That Bind needs no introduction. That's probably the one you'll want to use during the Guardian takedown, or if you just enjoy watching large groups of enemies disappear quickly. The Eternal Fist I find hard to work with. You may enjoy playing around with it. But I really love Fist Over Matter. It can keep an enemy grasped for a long time, deal a lot of damage, and give you a tremendous amount of healing while you dispatch nearby enemies. Yes, we'll be picking up Samsara. On to the green tree. 3 points into Personal Space, a big player in the damage formula. If you're firing a gun, you want this skill. 2 points into Clarity. Over time, I've come to the conclusion that points into Clarity are more valuable than points into Root to Rise. We'll be using our action skill a lot, doubling its effectiveness. 3 points into Samsara for amazing healing and extra gun damage. Any action skill you would want to use will give you stacks of Samsara, except for the straight grasp ones like Ties That Bind. Ties That Bind doesn't need Samsara though. But when you're slamming and casting amidst large groups of Mayhem 10 enemies, Samsara will keep you going. 2 points into Arms Deal for splash damage reduction and a small multiplicative boost to Remnant and Splash weapons. Lastly, we have 1 point into Find Your Center. The melee damage boost will increase our healing through Illuminated Fist and Sustainment. The melee range is essential though, allowing us to quickly apply our Groundbreaker damage, heal a bit, and stun the enemy. And here in this tree we've got 2 more action skills. Fracture has a shorter cooldown than Phase Slam, but I find Phase Slam can get me more stacks of Samsara. Both work with Phase Slam anointments. Really, it's your preference which one you want to use. In fact, that's the whole point. Use whatever action skill you want. Maybe today is feeling like a Fracture day, and tomorrow you'll want to play around with Fist Over Matter. Maybe you want to go mobbing with Ties That Bind and switch to Phase Cast for the boss. Or maybe you want to use Phase Cast for mobbing and switch to Ties That Bind for the boss. You have the freedom. You have the ability. You're good enough, you're smart enough, and doggone it, people like you. Since we're potentially using action skills with a long cooldown, we need to find some way to increase our cooldown rates. One such way is through our class mod. There's 2 options, a Phase Zerker and a Golden Rule. The Phase Zerker gives us max rush stacks whenever we use our action skill, and those rush stacks translate to increased action skill cooldown rate, along with a bonus to weapon damage and the building up of stacks of Violent Tapestry and Do Harm. The skill we are looking for in this class mod is Clarity. We do not want any points into Anima, if at all possible, because again, we want to keep the dots off of us and keep our shield fully charged. Golden Rule reduces our cooldown time whenever we are damaged, which means that whether we are taking damage or we are not taking damage and have a full shield, our cooldown is being reduced. The exception is if we are dotted, because Golden Rule does not stack from dots. Anima is bad for us, in case that hasn't been emphasized enough. Any skills that come with the Golden Rule are good for us, but Laid Bare is the best one, as it is a direct damage increase. Mindfulness is good for the shield regeneration delay improvement, allowing our shield to immediately start recharging once we're done taking damage. We want increased action skill cooldown rate as a passive on each of these class mods. Which class mod you use is completely up to you. They're both equal in their own ways. For our shield, we used the Band of Sidorak for this build. Everyone mourned the death of this shield when Gearbox patched shield stacking, but it was and still is one of the best in the game, in my opinion. You'll know this if you've watched my Flex Amara video. The main purpose of using this shield is for keeping it fully charged as often as possible, so that we can get an extra plus 200% action skill cooldown rate from topped off. It has a very fast recharge rate and a very short delay. The max health bonus and damage bonus when it is depleted are both also quite nice. As for our grenade, we use the It's Piss grenade. Like Laid Bare, it's a direct damage increase, and I like to throw it at any tanky enemy that gets my attention. Between the shield and grenade, I highly recommend you always have radiation as a bonus elemental damage anointment. Radiation explosions can kill multiple enemies at a time and contribute to the general chaos and destruction along with Indiscriminate and Remnant. I usually run Cryo as my second anointment to slow enemies down and for the occasional freezing. I'll swap it out for an appropriate element when bossing. Alright, so how about our artifact? This is where it gets really fun. We're using a Spark Plug Victory Rush. The Spark Plug does a lot of damage now after the Phase 2 patch, and the original slam that plants the Tesla coil procs Groundbreaker just like any melee. The coil will also constantly heal us through sustainment, and constantly add more and more damage to the next Groundbreaker attack, which can be really strong because of the way the Spark Plug chains itself to multiple enemies. The Victory Rush is there because it's another multiplicative damage bonus. An auto idle would work as well if you find yourself going down too often. You will want action skill cooldown rate on this artifact, just like with our class mods. A Pearl of Ineffable Knowledge can be substituted to get more damage while bossing, but by doing so you are losing action skill cooldown rate and the healing power of the Spark Plug. Caveat emptor. Shall we talk about our guns now? No, actually, let's talk about gun anointments instead. We can use a lot of them. Consecutive hits, 100 ASE, 250 phase cast, 300 phase slam, 200 ASA, next 2 mags, 200 splash, 300 over 90 if you've got a one-shotting rocket launcher or sniper or are using ties that bind. Our build gets bonuses from all different parts of the damage formula, and with any of these powerful anointments we can use a wide variety of guns. Want to snipe with the monocle? Sure, use ties that bind. Want to use the Cutsman against Wotan just like old times? Yep, just buff that sucker with a phase cast or phase slam anointment. Hellwalker? Check. 300 phase slam Maggie? Oh, you bet your sweet ass. I'm not happy with this game unless I can do most things with a Maggie. What about the good old redistributor? Pretty nice. How about we go a little crazy and equip the butt plug and use ties that bind and mimic my melee builds? It'll work. Single target damage won't be great though, so hey, I picked up a consecutive hits devoted that had just dropped and boom, problem solved. How about that face puncher white elephant groundbreaker combo meta that's going around? Go right ahead. And of course, you can equip the strongest meta guns and go take down those guardians. Really, this build does it all. It's general purpose. It's universal, one might say. It lets you try all kinds of guns, use cool action skills, throw grenades, slam a coil into the ground with our butts somehow, and just straight up punch things. The gameplay here is eclectic and varied, and I think it's what Gearbox was going for with this Phase 2 update. They did well. There's no new concepts with this build, but it is everything we know put together well. It has a lot of build diversity packed into one build. The amount of synergy between the various gear, skills, and guardian ranks is unreal. This build will be my measuring stick for the viability of guns, and it will be what I take into the 4th DLC when it comes out. By the way, you can check the video description for the save file. So there we go, that's my new main build. I've got ideas for other specialty builds, and I'd like to recreate my melee build from the ground up, but this will keep me going for a while. Until next time.